In the quiet moments before the world wakes up, there's a place where pain meets peace, where every breath feels like a prayer and grief stands still. We carry the weight of what was and search for meaning in the smallest things. And sometimes all it takes is one moment to remind us we're still here, still healing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Grieef Let's Talk About It podcast. You guys know who it is. This is Tony Lynch. I'm the host of this podcast. And yes, we are your number one podcast for bringing you stories around death, dying, and grief, all the messiness that comes in between with some amazing people out here changing people's lives one heartbeat at a time. Now, if this is your first time tuning in, do me a favor, head on over to their YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification so you'll be notified every time that we drop a new episode. And most importantly, maybe you know someone who can benefit from the conversations that we have. Do me a favor and share this along with them. One other thing, this is for educational purposes only. And also, this is a live stream. So if you have any questions or comments, put them in the comment section. We'll be sure to answer them as we go. Now, without further ado, guys, help me welcome my next guest to the show. Maria, how you doing?
I am great. I'm so glad to be here, Tony.
I'm excited. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Now, before we get started, introduce yourself to the audience. So tell people who you are, where you're from, and about the work that you do.
Sure. Thank you. So I am originally actually from Moscow, Russia, but immigrated here with my family when I was 8 years old. Have been living in the States, specifically in Massachusetts. I'm in the Boston area and very accurately Quincy, Mass, which is right next door to Boston. The work I do is I'm a stepparenting and co-parenting coach. I support parents in conflict at all different stages, whether they are wanting to get divorced, contemplating divorce, are in the messy middle of the divorce journey, or are co-parenting and rebuilding their lives post-divorce. I support them to ensure that they are understanding their children's needs and that they are able to be their best selves for their children and are protecting their children's really innocence and creating an emotionally safe space for them and really everyone involved as they rebuild and navigate this messy life transition.
First off, I want to say thank you for the work that you do. And it's really important. And it's something that people don't really talk about too often. And so I guess my first question would be, why is it not talked about as much as it needs to be? Because it can affect so many different people just from that one little scenario.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I do think that things are changing and it is being talked about a lot more because it is no longer, I think, as much of a taboo, just simply with the statistics and the numbers. The numbers that I saw recently reported, I think as of last year, were that first-time marriages, and 43% of first-time marriages end in divorce, though many people that I speak to believe that those numbers are a little bit higher and it's closer to 50%. For second-time marriages, it's around, I think, 63%. And third-time marriages, it goes up from there to, I believe, 73% or more. With each consecutive marriage, I think the odds increase of it ending in divorce, unfortunately. And so I think because of those trends, it's no longer a taboo. It is no longer an undesirable thing because just simply so many people are getting divorced and are for various reasons. But I think also people just have the courage to say, this isn't working. This is no longer suiting myself, maybe our kids, or just really our best interests, right? If there's a lot of conflict, if there's a lot of arguing, sometimes are even more severe situations where literally physical and emotional safety are at jeopardy. So in those situations, naturally, it is not conducive to move forward in that kind of an environment, and something's got to give. Perhaps they can work with somebody like me and figure it out and figure out a way to move forward. Perhaps they decide the cost of conflict is too high and they need to separate, and they can still work with somebody like myself to create a system that works to have effective communication and effectively co-parent, meaning making those decisions collaboratively with truly the best interests of the child at the center. But it takes work. So I will not paint a picture for anybody, any sort of delusion that this is easy and it's a snap of the fingers. It is not. It is work that requires building a foundation of understanding oneself and really learning oftentimes new ways of interacting with the co-parent and even with some of the emotional challenges that we experience ourselves. So as somebody who's very much lived this journey from all facets, I was a child of divorce. I got into an unhealthy relationship. My first marriage was emotionally and physically abusive. And I believe that there are just things in my childhood, in spite of my parents and my grandparents adoring me, they had functioned in a particular way that did not set me up for understanding what healthy boundaries look like, what healthy, emotionally healthy interactions and rhythms within a romantic partnership look like. It was not through any fault of their own. It wasn't that they didn't want me to have access to that information. It's just that it was not known. And I think that's often the trap that many of us fall into is we acquire these patterns lots of times from things that we've been exposed to in our own upbringing. And we don't know another way until we proactively seek support or seek that guidance and that education. And I am here to tell you, it is very much possible to learn these skills. You can build whatever you desire in your life, and it can truly be wonderful, but it does require you looking at and releasing old patterns and understanding how they are no longer serving you. And so that just takes awareness and I would say an intentionality to get access to those supports and do that work.
Now, which leads me to my next question. When we talk about how it affects the children, do you think, because children are very impressionable, right? And they model their behaviors behind what they see. And sometimes it becomes a normality, right? That, through several relationships, failed relationships, and behaviors that they may exhibit and may not even be aware of it. How do we separate the children and put them in a more positive environment so they're not affected by what's going on, by teaching them those tools and educate them on what healthy boundaries, what healthy relationships actually look like?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's so powerful and so important, and very much what I am committed to supporting families with. So the first thing to understand is kids watch everything that we do, and from what they observe, they are building their own frameworks for what it looks like to navigate conflict, what it looks like to set themselves up for those kinds of relational interactions. So quite literally, they are looking at the dynamic that exists in the home, what we're modeling for them with our co-parent, with other loved ones, right? Typically whoever we have the most common interaction with, meaning those who we're interacting with on a more regular basis. And they take those little tidbits that they observe in our behavior, and they then apply it to themselves because they're looking to us, especially under the age of about 7 or 8. We're in a low-grade hypnosis mode called theta. So essentially, the bare bones of this concept is kids are brand new organisms looking to survive. They're like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. These people are older. They've been around for a while, so they must have it figured out. So I'm going to indiscriminately observe and absorb everything that I'm seeing them do. That's essentially the nuts and bolts of it. So once that period of time passes and they become older, they do start to acquire the critical thinking, and they're able to be more discriminant with what they, and be more decisive. Like, I like this and I don't like this. But until that happens, everything they've observed, they've absorbed. And the other piece that happens is they're not always aware consciously of, oh, well, these are things that I've seen modeled for me, but actually I don't really like this, so I can release it. It's not always available to us on a conscious level until we dig in and start to really explore, right, and excavate some of these ideas and some of these concepts. So, which of course doesn't happen till much later in life because kids are young. They don't have the developmental capabilities to understand all of these nuances and such a deep level. So, what is really happening is if we want them to have healthy communication, healthy, right, being able to advocate for themselves, being able to honor themselves and their values and their worth, we need to model that for them. The good news is it's not like, well, we didn't have these skills, so our kids are doomed. The good news is we can start right now to shift those dynamics. We can start to do that work. And once we do start to do that work, we could talk to them about it, and they will see in our actions that we're showing up differently, that we're respecting ourselves differently, that we're interacting with people in our lives differently. That doesn't mean they're to blame, they're horrible, we're going to badmouth them. That means taking responsibility for our part, meaning what we can do, what is within our control. So if that means when somebody is interacting with me in this way and they're being hostile, perhaps aggressive, using language that feels really disrespectful to me, to create healthy boundaries, it doesn't mean I'm going to demand from them that they don't do that, because we have no control over what other people do, but we have control, full control of what we do. So what we can do is we can set up, okay, when somebody speaks to me in this way, I'm going to take a pause. I'm going to request that they please speak to me differently. If they don't honor that, I'm going to walk away. I'm going to take time. I'm going to take space. And I will maybe give it another attempt at a different time when they're more able to hear me and perhaps are more able to speak to me respectfully. Maybe that's not available through speaking, as I've said, right? Sometimes what co-parents will recognize and identify is they cannot speak respectfully to each other. It's just not available to them. So how else can they communicate in a way that they're sharing information back and forth without putting themselves in that type of an environment where they're being disrespectful, where they're not able to hear each other? So there's options available to us, but the very first thing is to start to really look and understand, where am I at and what do I need, and how is this impacting my kids? And so very often what is undistinguished is we have specific goals for our children, right? We want to instill certain things in them, right? Maybe it's to be kind, maybe it's to be respectful, maybe it's to honor their voice and their true needs. But until we really start to dig deep into what am I actually showing them through my life examples, right? How am I modeling this behavior for them? Am I unintentionally undermining these values that I'm hoping to instill in them? And that happens much more commonly than we often realize, not because we're bad parents, not because we don't want to make the world move for our children, just because we don't know. And oftentimes too, these concepts and these realities we're so close to them, we're so deeply invested that we don't see things for what they really are. So that is where having a third party support individual who understands this deeply and can provide us with the right guidance and resources is critical. And I will say I've invested in that personally for my family many times over, including even with the BH2O framework that I teach. I've enlisted, my husband and I have enlisted the support of the creator of the program, not because actually at this point in our lives, we don't have great communication. We do. We have amazing communication. But where we saw was my now daughter, who used to be my stepdaughter, is still very much healing from things she's experienced in the past. And in order to best support her, we recognized we could use some support to be better parents for her, because there's things that, as I mentioned, are undistinguished. We're too close to it. There's things we don't see about the situation. So again, really, I would say anybody at any level can often benefit from these tools and this kind of support, because there's always something that you can go deeper with. There's always something that you weren't aware of that you're doing that you could be doing better. And by better, I just mean more in alignment with your values and the results you actually would like to see for your family and yourself.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. Which, as you were saying that, I started thinking about generational traumas that people carry along with them, and unhealed parts of themselves that they carry over into these relationships, and it
Yes.
spills over into one another, right? And
Hmm.
so there sounds like there tends to be a conflict. And when you're inside of that conflict, everybody is a casualty of that conflict. And
Yes.
so, and I've seen, personally, many, many divorces. And I've
Hmm.
seen the ripple effects that it's had amongst the people who were involved in it, or just being family members, being friends, and things like that. And I've also seen the aftermath of it, where people were conflicted of, I've known this person so long through this individual, and now that this is over, I can no longer be friends with that individual. And so, the kids as friends that they've had throughout these relationships are now no longer there. You know,
Hmm.
um, People, like their aunties, step aunties, or uncles and grandmothers and things like that, they are no longer there.
Yeah.
Because one, and this seems to be the biggest thing that impacts them. They go, well, they're not blood, right?
Mm.
They were just part of said family when said family member got married, right? Is the, I want to be very careful when I say this, because I don't want to offend anyone. Is there a way that people can rekindle those relationships and keep them going in a healthy manner without causing conflict between said family member?
Yeah, it is tricky, as you pointed out, but yes, I believe that no matter what kind of fallout there has been in the past, there is a way to move forward, reach out, rekindle those relationships. Oftentimes, what you're talking about is really collateral damage, right? It's the collateral damage of there's all these amazing individuals that we're exposed to that are part of our family, maybe extended family, maybe through blended family, um, you know, uh, relationships that have formed, et cetera. And then, as you aptly put, when there's a separation or divorce, oftentimes, unfortunately, we lose those people. And sometimes we lose them because they're kind of forced to choose sides, or they're being, threatened, or it's being demanded of them that they have no longer have contact with the other side, if you will, maybe even the children. Sometimes we lose them because they're not sure how to proceed, and they're not sure what their role is and how they can interact in a safe manner so that they're not causing upheaval and upset for the the romantic couple that went through the split. Um, and sometimes, for example, there's also, alienation and estrangement that happen too, for meaning with the parents. So, for example, there are different things. Estrangement is often when there's a wound that the child may or may not have realized for a long time. And when they feel like they've tried and it's been many years and there's been no changes that they are needing to see, they might choose to no longer have contact with that parent, which is heartbreaking. A lot of times, unfortunately, those kinds of things they don't come to light until much later. So when the children are young, they're experiencing certain things that don't feel good to them, but they often put on a brave face. And then eventually, as they get older and they start to understand more of the details of their experience and kind of distinguish more of those emotions and challenges and the things that felt really terrible, that's when they often will make that decision for themselves. And it's really heartbreaking only because it's not impossible to reunify them and that parent. It's just that there's a lot more barriers. That child is deeply wounded. So there's just a lot more roadblocks in the way to that reunification, but it's not impossible. So to answer your question, there definitely is, I think, value in reaching out. There's definitely value in showing interest. It may require some support and help, as in the child might be really not feeling safe with that person for whatever reason, depending on their history, depending on how things were left. Um, and they may not feel comfortable interacting with them one-on-one. However, perhaps they might feel comfortable if the person were to offer, hey, would you like some support to rebuild our relationship? Would you be open to that? Perhaps. Um, of course, getting individual support for that situation, for that particular adult who is looking to rekindle that relationship would really still be valuable, because through that work, it is not requesting anything of the child. It is not putting any demands on the child, but it is offering, like we talked about, right? This often requires deep inner work for us to understand what is it that truly transpired, what role did we play in it, and what patterns were we engaging with that are no longer serving us? What habits perhaps are we, do we have that we would like to shift to other habits that will yield better results with our ultimate goals? So doing that individual work is highly valuable and can often yield positive results. And as part of that, we could definitely work through what would it look like to, rekindle this relationship? What does this person need from you? How are they experiencing your relationship from the past? Where are we starting so that we can build a road to a better place together? So there are definitely options for ways of doing that. But again, it is no small feat, and it is an investment of time and energy and a real commitment to doing that work.
I love that. Which when here's something that really gets to me
Mhm.
when I see these things happen is pitting the kids against parents, right? You
Mm,
have one parent, because I've had this happen to me, right? I've
yeah.
had it happen to me, and I know what it took for me to repair and have a bond with my son, after it happened. But there was a lot of things that were being said that was very unnecessary, and it was one-sided, right? There was no sense of going back and forth and things like that, saying, oh son, your mother's this, and having to go back and forth, because children don't need to be in the middle of that conflict. That is something, as you said before, that needs to be communicated between both parents
Yeah.
without weaponizing the children,
Yeah.
and causing more damage that needed to be done, right? Mentally,
Yes.
physically, emotionally, and so when in situations like that, how do get the parents to understand what they're doing? I understand anger. I understand, the damage that's being done during said relationship and the separation that comes in between that, but I've never really understood why bring children into it.
Yeah.
But
So,
unfortunately, it does happen.
yeah, unfortunately, I think a lot of times parents are doing this not, to their children. I think they're doing it because of their children. I think what's happening is that parents are completely in fight or flight mode. I think they're totally dysregulated. I'm sure you deal with that a lot in the grief work that you do with people. And so that what that looks like is we're in our lizard brain, meaning we are just reactive. We're just looking to survive. This is horrible. It feels awful on all fronts, right? Something like divorce, for example. I mean, talk about grief. It is all encompassing. Your entire world is being shattered into a million pieces, financially, logistically, spiritually, maybe, definitely from a sense of community and your support systems, your household, right? Your place to live, but also now you're being singly responsible oftentimes for your children, because oftentimes I'm hearing that typically things start off at like a 50-50 custody arrangement. So now you're going from a two-parent household to being entirely responsible for your kids in all ways that maybe you haven't had to be responsible in those ways for, or you're not sure how to do that. And you have to figure it all out at the drop of a dime. So talk about system being on fire, central nervous system being on fire. So naturally, we're in a state of survival. And from a state of survival, we can't possibly consider all of the things that we need to. Like, is this going to serve me in the long term? Is this a good decision right now if I say this to my soon to be former partner, or maybe former partner? Is this going to serve my child if I respond this way? Right? We're not able to understand those deeper implications because we're not able to use our higher functioning um, abilities to actually look at that situation, not from a place of being in that fight or flight mode. We first have to calm our central nervous system in order to access those higher functioning brain functions in order to truly see the whole of the situation so that we can then make the best possible decisions. And I think that's really what you're pointing to. I think that when you're seeing kids being used against the other parent, there's a parent just desperate. They're just desperate. They want to keep their kids safe. They also want to preserve their relationship with their kids. They're feeling like their time with their children is in jeopardy. Maybe the other parent is going to court and making a strong argument why they should have perhaps sole custody or more parenting time or something like that. And this parent is just terrified. They're feeling totally threatened. So they're just freaking out and having those rash responses, right? They are totally reactive. And I think that's exactly the essence of the type of support and why support is needed is they're not realizing the deeper impact that they have. I think if they were to be in a state of calm and we were to look together at, do you realize these are some of the things you're actually setting your kids up for? I think they would often say, I don't want to do that. What? I'm doing that. I didn't know I was doing that. I don't want to do that. What else can I do? But they're often just feeling truly desperate. And they're feeling unheard and they're feeling victimized by the system and everything else. They're just feeling like truly like a soccer ball being kicked around and constantly at the mercy of everybody else, at the co-parent, at the system, at the family law attorneys, perhaps, or mediators or other family law professionals that are involved in their case, or perhaps in the case of maybe something more serious going on, possibly even child protective services and other professionals. And they're just terrified. They're absolutely terrified. And I think that's really where the support that I provide comes in, is we don't need to heal your relationship and we don't need to figure out who did what to whom, but we do need an effective system to move forward that doesn't keep presenting that type of chaos and that on fire type of environment for your kids, because they deserve peace, regardless of what happened. I get it. Nobody ever gets married to get divorced. That's never in the plans, but it happens. And so how can you guys navigate that journey, but keeping that stability, security, and sense of calm for your children?
I love that. And now, when it comes down to the divorce rate, I want to dive deeper into that, just a little bit, because I think a lot of times when divorces happen, it's usually a lack of getting to know the person before you actually make the decision to want to spend the rest of your life with that individual, right? And I'm an old school individual. I was raised in understanding courtship, right? And I was taught this, and the way that it was taught to me was take the time to get to know that person. Nothing physical, but going out and figuring out what you like and what you don't like, right? Developing a strong friendship first, because I want to be able to be with my friend because my friend is going to know me, right? And be able to understand the parts of me that I lack in. And I think that's where your partner needs to be strong in, and vice versa. Now, and I think people rush the process they rush the process and they're quick to go, oh, I like this person. And there's a difference between love and lust, right? To being committed and being infatuated with an individual, and they fall, they look so similar, but I think people look past that, right? And in turn, 6 months down the line, you made a really quick decision to want to spend the rest of your life with this individual, and then you find out that you don't even like this person. And this was taught to me at an early age. Get the time to get to know this person, because you may realize that you don't even like that person like that. Maybe it was just a brief moment of miscalculated judgment, and you was infatuated with what they look like instead of who they are, right? So, in your thoughts and opinions, what would you say to that?
I think that is such a brilliantly important and necessary underscoring of the reality of what happens, right? Because, and especially I think if somebody has already had a serious relationship, right? Because you come out of the relationship and maybe it's post-divorce, and you have children, or maybe not. But right, things have often been going south for a while. So you're like, oh, I'm so done, right? Like you're just so frustrated on all these different fronts where maybe your needs haven't been being met or you've just been living in discord. And so I think sometimes people are so thrilled to be like, I'm finally free. I can go out and I can do my own thing and I can find the right person for me. And to your point, maybe it's like, this is great and this is fun, but perhaps it is not a true match or one that you have really tested out to make sure that it is a true fit and a true match for long-term success. Because to your point, your needs immediately after separation or breakup are going to be different than maybe your long-term needs. And you might not even be in a place emotionally to identify them because it takes time. And truly, with my first divorce, I heard this quote from somebody and I think it was brilliant because it was so true for me. And I wonder if it's true for others, that it takes a half-life of the relationship to actually fully untangle yourself and really get completely over the relationship. So my first relationship was 16 years. And I will say it took about 10 for me to completely pull out all the threads from that yarn and really make sense of it. Now, I made a lot of great progress along the way, but really, I would say truly, it took about 10 years to be totally clear on everything that had happened. And for me to no longer be emotionally in a place where I was defending this person who had done some things that really weren't okay. But that's kind of the nature of some of these things, right? With emotional abuse, especially. Any element of emotional abuse. I know there's a whole spectrum of how that can go. So I think it's so key to your point to not rush into anything, get really clear. And again, a lot of that also requires a lifting of processing, because at first we're not processing. We're just like, thank God it's over. I needed a break. My system can just be, I just needed some peace and quiet. That's very different than actually digging into the history and understanding what transpired. What were the patterns? What was it specifically that was so unbearable or so deeply painful? Or what needs weren't being met? Or how was I interacting? How was the other person interacting? And until you can get really clear on that, I think it's difficult to get super clear on what your goals are. However, there's definitely support and help and professionals who can help you understand what types of questions to ask. And I also think another piece is for those who are rebuilding after a divorce or separation, or those who have children, I think that requires even more intentionality, because now you can't just make decisions that work for you. You also have to consider your kids' needs. And your kids have really serious, deep needs from that person. So I think it is critical and absolutely mandatory, really, to consider, is this person going to vibe well with my children? Because if not, it doesn't mean you don't ever date them, number one. It also doesn't necessarily mean that you can't have a relationship, but maybe what will be unavailable is you guys moving in together. What will be unavailable is you guys spending time together all the time. Maybe you can spend time together sometimes, but maybe what that really looks like is you're spending most of your time with your kids, and then sometimes you're spending time with this other person, and very rarely are you all together. It really just depends on what is available and what's going on and what the needs are of the children primarily, but also what is available from the adults, right? And how are they able to get creative in some of resolving some of these questions and some of these challenges. Some people are maybe open to growth more than others. But I think all of these things really need to be deeply considered, to your point. And oftentimes, time is a key factor, not because you have to take all the time in the world, but a lot of times doing emotional work is a heavy lift and you can't get it all done at once. So especially if you're not used to digging into that and you don't know, it's like learning a new language, right? You're not going to become proficient at it right away. And then on top of it, there's a lot of work to do. So it's like learning to read in a new language and maybe becoming like a lawyer, right? You have to understand everything you're reading. You have to make sense of it. You have to structure your case. And now you have to make sure that you're representing your client's best interest. So just as a quick, short analogy, hopefully that's a decent one. You have to learn how to speak the language of what emotional intelligence looks like to really deeply uncover and understand What have you lived through? How has it molded you? And where are you at now? And then think of what do you want for your future? And now learn ways of bridging that gap. It's a heavy lift, as I said. So oftentimes, unfortunately, time is a piece that has to be involved as well. And you have to give it the proper respect and the proper amount of space to run its course.
Now, which leads me to something, because this is something that I found pretty interesting, because I'm surrounded by, I have a lot of female friends as well as male friends, right? But my female friends, they often say, they often encourage each other to check boxes. Does this individual check these boxes? And, and I found that very interesting for the simple fact of, they're still single. But yet they keep finding people that check these boxes, and they go, oh, this person they're perfect. They've checked all the boxes. I think I'm going to move forward with it. And they find themselves in situations to where certain secrets may be revealed. Maybe the person that they're choosing is a narcissist. We both know about narcissists. Narcissists are really good at camouflaging themselves in order to fit into the narrative. And then once they get their hooks into you, they begin to manipulate and mold you into their own personal punching bag. They become very controlling, et cetera, right? And so what do you think about the box checking method?
I think it's important to know which boxes to check. So I think if we're looking at only superficial things, then we're going to miss the mark, as you pointed out. I think if we're looking for heart-aligned things and we're constantly digging deeper into how can I clarify this even more for myself? What would it look like to have this? So for example, if I'm looking to build a relationship with deep mutual respect and somebody who's growth-oriented and somebody who's truly going to be a partner through thick and thin, what does that look like? What qualities would this person have? What would it actually feel like? And if I truly imagine it as a mind movie, if you will, what is the feeling, right? What are the nuances of how that person is going to behave and interact with me, with my children, etc., that will show me that in fact I do have these things present, right? And I think that's a better way to do it, because sometimes if we're just looking to put words to it, that can fall short a little bit. So for example, when I talk about communication, I'll often speak to communication is so much more than words, right? It's our tone, it's our facial expressions, it's our body language, it's the nuances of the energy. And we can feel truly when somebody's heart to heart connected to us and their intention versus when that isn't there. And I think that's such an important aspect to consider throughout what you're describing, which is when we are kind of setting our sights for what's next.
I love that. Now, let's get into your journey, because that was very, very informative. And I want people to get more of a background of how you got there. So what was your journey like and becoming who you are today? And when was that aha moment when you went, more people need to be aware of this?
Thank you for asking. So my journey is a little funky. So my parents had an extremely tumultuous marriage, very, very tumultuous. As I mentioned, I came from Russia. Russian culture is extremely different than American culture, at least with the way that it's talked about publicly. So at least that was my experience and my sense. So in Russia, children are possessions. When I came to America, it seemed like everything is focusing on autonomy and really supporting the child to be autonomous to the degree that they're able to be and to successfully launch. In Russia, that's something that happens, but it didn't seem like it was something talked about. And so it was very much, put your head down, elders know best, obey. And maybe part of that is because I was a girl. Maybe it's different for boys. I don't know, because I didn't have any siblings and my mom's an only child and she didn't have any siblings either. So I'm not sure if it was a function of, the gender or not, but I I think for me as a highly sensitive kid, and I had no idea that I was until I was an adult, and I learned that through taking an assessment. Um, I felt everything very deeply. So when I had no space to speak, and I was constantly, I felt like sort of pushed down in that regard, not being able to express myself, not being able to be heard, um, and overridden in many regards to what I was supposed to do on a daily basis, it was unbearable to me. It was extremely painful. It was extremely difficult. And so it brought on a lot of strong emotions. The other thing that my family didn't do is we didn't talk about emotions. We had a lot of emotions bouncing around all over the place, very hot.
Yeah.
And then it would blow over and it was like nothing happened. And in some ways, it is incredible love, right? To be able to have like World War III take place in your home emotionally and then just like pretend like nothing happened and like you're completely embraced. However, it does not lead to a processing of what that all meant. It does not lead to closure. It does not lead to a closeness and a connectedness, right? Because it doesn't lead to any opportunity to learn who this person is and how to better connect with them and what their needs are. And in turn, how to compromise and, meet the needs of others. So that piece was deeply missing for me. And I just felt like a basket case. I had no idea of how to navigate all of that. And that really was my experience daily for a very long time. And then I went from this extremely nurtured environment into my first relationship that turned out to be with somebody who seemed to demonstrate some narcissistic like tendencies. I will not say whether he had it or not. And I also believe that any and all of those behaviors are a function of, again, necessity. I think that it is a survival mechanism that somehow they learn, likely from something that was modeled for them. But regardless, going into that environment, and I had no idea because back then nobody talked about what coercive control looks like or what's unhealthy behavior or unhealthy communication or what are the red flags. Like it just wasn't talked about. So I really had no clue. So I was very naive and sheltered going into this environment. As you said, there was some manipulation, there was a lot of control. And for me growing up with that, it's like, yeah, of course, this is how it's been. So naturally, right? I didn't see anything wrong with it. And that's where I mean my very well-intentioned, loving parents who sometimes use some manipulation and fear tactics to keep me in line, which was very effective, unfortunately, but it did not set me up for speaking my mind, advocating for myself, taking sometimes risks in order to protect my own safety. And so because I didn't build those skills, I didn't know how to navigate that scenario. And it took me a long time. It took me 16 years to identify this isn't healthy, this isn't working for me, and to leave. And it was only through the help of a clinician, of a counselor. And it still took a few sessions, several sessions for me to fully flush this out and identify, oh, wow, yeah, this is codependency and this is unhealthy and it's not working. And so when I distinguished that, it was really painful. And I found myself, when I was talking to loved ones about my separation and divorce, I found myself feeling so much shame and guilt because every time I thought of how to word it, I'm like, well, I'm just an idiot. Why would I stay? If this is how it was, why would I stay? And so I just, again, had no words. And then I just ended up saying, yeah, it was mutual because I couldn't find anything else to say that would make sense. And eventually, I remember years later, when I was already with my now husband, a friend of mine who I met through a networking group who was going through a similar experience, but they had been going through therapy. And she started to name some of the examples that she had been living through. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's somebody who gets it. Like you're giving words to my experience. I'm not alone and I wasn't crazy. It just felt so validating to understand, oh, wow, this is real. And my boundaries were encroached upon and it was a process and my mind did get tangled, but it wasn't always tangled and I wasn't crazy for feeling this way. But essentially after my divorce and I had kind of written off like, well, I guess I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life. I gave it a go. I was very committed, but it didn't work out. Too bad. I met my now husband, and at the time he had a daughter, and I was like, I'm in no way, shape, or form able to be a parent person. Like, she should not have any exposure to me. I'm a mess and she needs a better role model. So I offered to be his wing woman and find him somebody better. And over the course of the next 4 months, he convinced me that, in fact, what I experienced as a child that didn't serve me so well, that I was clear on, set me up to be a better parent figure to her than I was giving myself credit for, which was very scary. But when I let that sink in, I was like, okay, deep breath, here we go. And I jumped off the cliff and we met. And that was going to be the determining factor. If it was going to go well, we were going to move forward. If not, we were going to end there. So thankfully she liked me. So we moved forward. And then 5 years into my step-parenting role, she revealed that she was being abused and neglected by her bio mom and stepdad and moved in with us full time. So I went from a stepmom role and seeing her only on weekends to now being pretty much a mother figure role, but holding space for the fact that I'm not her mom and making sure that she had the space to have that relationship to whatever degree it was available, right? And whatever that journey looked like for her. And that was 7 years ago that she moved in with us. And a year and a half ago, I adopted her. She had full say in that choice. She had tried family therapy with mom 8 months after she moved in for about a year, but it did not work out. And then she ended up choosing to not have any contact with mom. And before I adopted her, she did meet with mom to talk to her and request permission for her to relinquish parental rights. She was almost 18. So really she had, in a couple of months, she was going to have full decision anyway, but mom agreed. And so I adopted her. And, only in the last couple of years did I fully put the dots together from my childhood and how things were and the dynamic to what led me to that first relationship, to the journey that I've taken into the new relationship and all of the things that I had to really face head on, all my fears, all the challenges, all the stories of I'm a monster and I'm unfit and I'm unlovable and all of that, right? I had to really face head on. And that's just an example, I guess, when I say it takes a lot of emotional heavy lifting. It does.
Yeah. As you was talking, as you were saying that, I started thinking, you mentioned emotional intelligence at the beginning of the conversation. I would say more than 80% of human beings don't even understand what emotional intelligence is, right? And that there's pieces that go along with it, and when I say this, I'm only speaking from my perspective and the journey of becoming more emotionally aware, emotionally intelligent of myself, right? Yeah. So the process, and I could be wrong in this, but this is what worked for me. Once I was aware of the emotions, I was actually able to learn, and the second part, it goes into multiple pieces. I was able to articulate them as well as begin to allow myself to feel them. And then learning how to distinguish if a situation needed such emotion. Because and that led into the emotional intelligence part, right? It analyzing situations and going, okay, does this emotion that I'm feeling deserve this situation? If it didn't, I look at it and I go, it's not even worth the emotion that goes along with it. Because, when you think about it, everything in your life is repetitive, right? And if you can reflect on what the emotion brought to the first 100 times that it happened to you and the way that the outcome of that, you can begin to analyze it and go, nope, it didn't work out the first time. My emotions, there's nothing behind it. So I want to be very careful about the emotion that I apply to said situation, right? And not give it the energy that it needs, right?
Yeah. I'd love to respond to this because it's so beautiful what you're pointing out. And I think I have a tiny different way that I talk about it. So I think what you're pointing to is that our emotions, like, they happen, they can be triggered by whatever, right? We have an emotional response. There are feelings. Feelings are just feelings, just like thoughts, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that they're real. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's all this like intentionality behind them necessarily. They are just thoughts. They are just feelings. And oftentimes, too, to your point, we have an emotional response to something because our body keeps the trauma that we've experienced. It stores those experiences in our body. And sometimes we just have that physiological response that feels like an emotion or is tied to an emotion that isn't actually in response to what's happening now. It's from some sort of a past event that started to tremor because there's some sort of a similarity, right? And so we go into that full response, and it doesn't actually have to do with what's happening in the moment. So I think what you're talking about is so valuable and so important to underscore, is that as human beings, we have a rich history of events we've lived through and experienced. And until we fully process and release that, right? And that's why it's also, as part of our healing journey, it's so valuable to have ways of moving that feel good, that allow us to release that energy so that it doesn't stay stuck, and so that we don't keep ourselves back by not releasing it. And so, yeah, it really requires a holistic approach to recognize. And I think what you're talking about is really choice. And it's that reactivity I mentioned before. So when we respond purely out of our emotions, assuming that it is the be all and end all truth, that's when we get ourselves into deep water. If on the other hand, we recognize sometimes we have strong emotions and that's all that they are, and we just need time for them to pass, to cool down, quite literally cool down our central nervous system, we can be so much more effective at what ultimately serving our goals, because then we allow things to calm and we're intentional about the choices we make, whether we approach that conversation because it has merit to explore, or whether, to your point, we decide, you know what, this doesn't even make any sense. It has nothing to do. I just got triggered. Whatever, I've calmed down now, we can move on. It doesn't even require the energy of exploring it or doing anything about it. It's a waste of time and energy, really. And I could do better to put that time and energy elsewhere into something else that really requires my attention. So yeah, I think what you're saying is so, so important and valuable and really necessary to recognize.
I love that. Thank you.
Mm.
And as you were speaking, you mentioned the tremors, the emotional tremors that come along with it, right? And as you know, as I began to think about that, I was thinking, that comes in a multitude of stages as well, right? Because those emotional, as you said, those emotional tremors can often lead to a trigger, and when that happens, it can be reflective of a person's um, unhealed past,
Mm-hmm.
behavior analysis,
Mm-hmm.
um, emotional neglect or lack of emotional intelligence and awareness
Mm-hmm.
and recognition, right?
Yeah.
And then those things will play a factor in that. So, when we put that all into the thing, it's like a huge pyramid.
Yeah.
GBA Radio, thank you for tuning in, my brother. So, and when people come to you looking for support,
Mm-hmm.
what can individuals expect to get from you?
So there's different ways that I support parents. Oftentimes, if they are co-parenting together, it makes sense to go through the BH2O framework because they get so much in that program, I guess, in that framework, and by going through the curriculum, they get to support themselves on an emotional level that really nourishes them in those times of high conflict and highly triggering situations. And they also get an effective system of how to respond and step back into their power. However, if somebody is identifying, there was an event that I've lived through and I can sense how it's impacting me in my daily life. Maybe it's memories that are coming up. Maybe it's a certain behavior, like when X happens, I tend to do Y, and I don't want to do Y because it's not who I want to be. It doesn't align with what I recognize would be valuable, or like the person I'm trying to build myself to be. I can support them with that as well. I have, behavior aligned tools in my toolbox that I can utilize. And so that could be potentially fewer number of sessions where we're working one-on-one specifically to address those past experiences and give them a powerful way to move forward that feels more clear and more intentional and more aligned with who they are and how they'd like to respond to those situations. So it really does depend. I have a variety of ways that I support, parents and even just individuals. And so I'd strongly suggest that if somebody is looking for anything like that, that they reach out, we can have a conversation. And if I'm not the right fit, no problem. I have a wonderful network of incredible professionals that I'm happy to connect you with for any and all types of support that you may be, depending on what you're going through.
I love that, because I'm glad that you said that, right? Because
Yeah.
Since I've been in the grief field and working with so many individuals across the world, I often come across a lot of other companies, organizations where they're too afraid to admit that they're not like they may not be the best fit for these individuals. So they try to hold on to them, or they hold on to them, and in turn, they do more damage to these individuals
Mhm.
because they don't have the necessary tools to address the specific needs of these individuals. And so I think that's something that people need to understand as well, that if you're in a situation like that, it is okay for you to have someone that can be a better fit for those individuals,
Mhm.
so they can get the necessary support that they desperately need, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I want to say thank you, Pete, versus Anxiety podcast. Greetings to you as well, my brother. Thank you for tuning in, Trinity Boy. Thank you for tuning in as well. Everybody on Instagram, thank you for tuning in. Everybody on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, everyone that's tuning in, thank you. Salute to you. And hopefully, you guys are enjoying the conversation. And again, we still have a few minutes left, so if you guys have any questions or comments for either myself or my guests, please put them in the comment section. Remember, this is a live stream, so we'll be answering them as we go, right? And of course, Maria, she's been amazing. And just for the record, for everyone, tell people about the work that you do again, please.
Sure. So I really support parents in conflict, as well as step parents, as well as blended families who are looking to rebuild, and especially those who are navigating any sort of separation or divorce type of transition at any point in their journey. Those are the folks that I really support and work with. And specifically, my approach is very child-centered. I will presence for the parents what is happening with the children, giving voice to the children, and supporting them to understand the deeper needs that their kids have that often go unnoticed because kids put on a brave face. They don't want to add to the conflict they're already feeling and seeing that their parents are stressed in these situations. And they don't want to add to that. They're scared to add to that. They're looking for security and stability, and they want to know that things are going to be okay. So oftentimes they don't actually share how difficult things are for them and how much pain they're in because they don't have the words to say it. Sometimes they don't even have the awareness to identify it for themselves. But certainly they're just really scared of the repercussions of what that may do to their relationships with their parents.
I love that. And guys, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comment section. We'll be sure to answer them. So now, as we begin to close off this episode of the Grieef Let's Talk About It podcast, unless anybody have any questions or comments that they have out there, how can people find you?
Yeah, so my website is synergisticstepparenting.com. I also am on LinkedIn, also at Synergistic Step Parenting. I'm also on Facebook as Maria Natapov, just like you see spelled here on the screen. And you're welcome to DM me. You're welcome to email me at my website. My website also has a contact form. My phone number is 617-419-0878. So you're welcome to call me. I've recently partnered very happily with What's in Law, a really phenomenal visionary family law firm that is dedicated to supporting families going through divorce and these types of transitions in a holistic way. So you can also find a way to contact me through their website at woodsonlaw.com. I think it's actually woodsonlawfirm.com, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, I'm definitely out there.
I love that. And so now my next question would be, if Maria had a superpower, what would it be?
Ooh. Such a good one. It's like, part of considering this is considering, what do I want the superpower to be, but also what kind of fallout do I not want to have to deal with, right? Let's see. Maybe the power to, what do you call that when you transport and immediately
Teleportation?
Yes, teleportation. Thank you. I think that, because I tend to be late, and so I think that one would really save me.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And so my final question to you would be, if you could leave the audience with something, what would you leave them with?
Oh, when in doubt, go inward. If you're in a tough place, if you're in a dark spot, that was truly like my saving grace, was when I didn't know where to turn. I didn't know how to get myself out of a really terrible situation. It was emotionally painful, and I just felt like I was in this dark place, and I felt like my body was getting physically ill, and I didn't know what to do about it. And I felt like I had nowhere to turn. And just listen inward. Give yourself the gift of just getting curious, asking the question. Don't be afraid to ask the question and listen. And I promise, if you do this consistently and you truly want to hear, you will be guided to the right resources, to the actions to take, to everything. It's all right there for you. You have everything you need inside of you. You just need to have the courage to look.
I love that. I love that. And so, and with that being said, we're gonna go ahead and wrap this one up. I want to say thank you again, Maria, for being on the show, being and sharing your journey, but also sharing your work with us. Such important work, because there's multiple layers that people don't even understand that goes along with what you do, and how valuable that work is, especially when it comes down to the parents as well as the kids and the people, the surrounding people, because the ripple effect that it has when people are going through said things. And I think most of that comes from the lack of self-awareness,
Mhm.
in situations, and breaking the habits, like you said, understanding how to communicate effectively, but also having healthy ways of dealing with the situation, and learning how to be effective co-parents at the
Yeah.
end of the day, because that's what truly matters. And with that being said, for everybody out there, I want to say thank you guys for tuning in. As always, allow me to keep bringing these conversations to you guys and supporting the channel. And if you haven't already, if you're still over here on Instagram, you're still watching on Instagram, head on over to that YouTube channel for me, please, and hit that subscribe button and hit that bell notification. But also a brief update. Tomorrow morning, we will be doing the other show on Connect Work. We got a very special guest up there, GBA Radio. I know you're going to be looking forward to that. So 10 a.m. Mountain Time, whatever time zone you're in, just tune in for that as well. And we're rocking it out. We're definitely rocking it out. You guys already know me. You guys can follow me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and keep up to date. But another update for you guys: the magazine will be out before this weekend, as well as the new chapters for the Adventures of Grieef guys. So keep your eyes out for that as well. We got the animation coming for you guys, so you guys stay tuned for that. And with that being said, guys, I love you guys. Thank you for allowing me to keep doing this. And keep having fun with you, keep informing you, and maybe someone who can benefit from the conversations that we have. Do me a favor, share this along with them, and tell them that there's people out here like Maria that are out here changing people's lives one heartbeat at a time. And with that being said, thank you guys for always supporting the channel. We're going to see you guys in the next one. I love you, and as always, if you're not doing it, make sure you're making memories with the people that you love, because tomorrow's not promised. All right?
Mhm.
With you guys in the next
Thank you
episode.
so much.
Thank you
Thank
as
you so
well.
much. Take care.